Trump has been in power for about a week now, and already he's driving huge change, not just in the US, but in other countries as well. And no surprise here, illegal immigrants and foreign criminals have been a big issue and a major focus of Trump's plan and what he really wants to do now that he's president once more. But personally, I am surprised to say that it's actually been Colombia that we see a head-to-head argument between sovereign nations that we saw this kick off with, first of all. Now, if you aren't aware of what happened between Trump and the Colombian president, it's really simple. The Trump administration loaded up 2 military transport aircraft. They filled them up with Colombian illegal immigrants and they flew them to Colombia. The Colombian government then and their president actively refused to allow the planes to land, and Trump reacted very quickly, announced that 25% of all exports from Colombia into the United States would have tariffs placed on them, and that in 1 week, if this whole situation didn't resolve itself, those tariffs would rise to 50% if Colombia doesn't start accepting the deportations of their illegal immigrants. Trump also announced a travel ban on Colombians in general. He said he would stop allowing visas for people who wanted to travel from Colombia into the US, and that he would revoke all visas from Colombian government officials and any of their allies or supporters. And Trump, of course, said that this would only be the beginning. Now, straight off the bat, the Colombian president came out and he claimed that it was all about dignity and respect for the people that were being deported. That's because they were using military planes, not civilian planes, apparently, and that these illegal immigrants were being treated like criminals. The Colombian president took issue of that distinctly, which is exactly what they are, right? Illegal immigration is a crime, hence the word illegal. It then escalated a little bit further with the Colombian president putting out this incredibly weird rant on Twitter, and it's really long, so I'll give you just the action points here, but he had some quotes like, "I don't like your oil, Trump, you're going to wipe out the human species with your greed. You consider me an inferior race. I don't shake hands with white slavers." And he also states actively that if the US raises tariffs to 50%, Colombia will do the same against the United States, and that he had just instituted tariffs against the United States equivalent to 25%. Now, in reality, the Colombian president is simply left-wing, and he's always hated Trump, and that rant really proved it, because 90% of what he spoke about had nothing to do with the deportation of illegal immigrants. This president has been speaking actively out against Trump time and time again already, and really he just used this as an excuse to get some press and to try and look strong in the face of Trump. Now, something else that came up in the rant from the Colombian president was Panama, and how essentially that land was stolen from Colombia by the United States. Trump has also been speaking about it more recently, about how the Americans built the canal and how it's now essentially been stolen away and is now controlled by the Chinese. But back in 1903, 122 years ago, the US government supported Panama in their war, their civil war against Colombia, and then basically ran it as a colony afterwards. So again, we see Petro, the Colombian president, essentially trying to drive back at that bit of history and rile up some support amongst his fellow Colombians for his presidency. I think it's pretty clear that he definitely didn't expect a response so strong from Trump, and frankly, nor did I or many other people, for only a few hundred illegal migrants. Full expulsion of old diplomats, 50% tariffs, a complete travel ban for all the Colombians. Essentially, one day later, Colombia gave in and the situation entirely de-escalated. US military aircraft are now allowed to deport illegal immigrants without limitation or delay. Colombia also said they'd not be raising any tariffs and they'd be pulling theirs back. The US said they'd do the same and cancel their drafted tariffs. But Trump, of course, said that he won't hesitate to bring them back if Colombia reneges on their agreement in any way. It's pretty clear that geopolitics are gonna be a little bit weird going forward here. If you're in the United States, you're probably gonna come out on top. If you're in a country in Europe, like me in the UK, there's a good chance that you don't. So a quick digression here. If you are a coach and educator or an expert in any particular field and you've ever thought about selling your information and coaching people online, I run a separate business called Stoic Growth doing exactly that, helping people like you, coaches and educators, grow a $100,000 a year online business. If that sounds interesting at all, go down to the link in the description or the pinned comments and you can learn a little bit more about how it all works. Now, the situation with Colombia and Trump seems to be sorted, but of course there are going to be other situations popping up as well. Haiti is definitely a point that we should be taking a very strong look at. There's a lot of civil unrest in Haiti, which isn't surprising. The country's been in a total mess for hundreds of years at this point, but essentially criminal gangs rule the country as tribal warfare is kicking off. It is a horrible situation. There's a lot of suffering, a lot lot of death, a lot of malnutrition. It's genuinely an awful situation to see. And as a result of that, thousands and thousands of illegal migrants have gone from Haiti to neighboring countries, most of whom seem to be going into Mexico first and then crossing the US border into there, bypassing the legal process for asylum seeking. There are, of course, also loads and loads of instances of illegal immigrants, in particular Haitian ones, committing crimes and murder and gang warfare and crimes against women and all sorts of other awful things. It was widely reported throughout the election campaign, but then the left-wing media and the Democrat Party essentially tried to claim that it was all false news and fake. And once Trump actually won the election, it then came out from these same left-wing media outlets that it was all real. So obviously there's been widely expected that mass deportations of these people were to be coming straight away after the Trump inauguration, and they have already started. It just wasn't as explosive a start as we saw with Colombia. If there is any resistance to the deportation of these illegal immigrants, though, from Haiti or any other country really, we should fully be expecting Trump to use huge amounts of their soft power and maybe even their hard power to push it through. The Dominican Republic, who share the island of Hispaniola with Haiti, have been deporting thousands of their citizens every single week since October last week. And of course, there's been no worldwide news there because it doesn't drive the same anger or emotion in people, but it is the exact same principle. The Dominican Republic is much more wealthy and stable than Haiti. The country is worried that if they let in thousands of unchecked Haitians into the country and to stay there, problems will arise. Immigration in these terms is very rarely a positive for a country's economy. The migrants aren't well educated, they don't have savings, they don't invest into the economy, and governments almost always have to pay for their living. And then, of course, there's the high risk of criminals crossing alongside those actually seeking a better opportunity. Now, other countries that there's going to be some strong or dangerous tensions with between Trump, of course, we have China. There are always tough tensions between the US and China, and the very recent news is this new AI that's been developed in China that is reportedly the best AI in the world in a number of different ways. There's also some rumors and accusations that this AI is using NVIDIA's best microchips, which are supposed to be banned from exporting to China. If that can be verified in any way, we can bet on very heavy sanctions against China and maybe even a company like NVIDIA or whichever other countries or companies have been managing to actually get those chips sent overseas to China. Now, Taiwan, there's always a possibility to cause a little bit of a trade war there. And then, of course, China's constant manipulation of its currency and their policies to try and prioritize its domestic industry when exporting to the United States and the rest of the world. That little European nation, Denmark, of course, there's that little spat going on between them and the United States for Greenland. Now, I personally don't think this is serious, to be honest. I think it's a distraction, and I don't know why, but I do weirdly feel like it's related to Ozempic. They had $14 billion in sales for Ozempic in 2023, and likely more than $20 billion in 2024, as they've grown at about 20 to 30% every single year, and a huge amount of that was exported to the US. I actually see this as a little bit of a potential opportunity for Trump to use this spat between Denmark and the United States as an excuse to target Ozempic and to get the United States domestic market to switch to a domestically owned alternative. Now, one of the biggest issues from this whole event is that essentially globalists and these leading left-wing figures around the world, they can't pretend that Western countries don't have soft power and influence anymore, right? Colombia didn't want their migrants back, and they thought Trump would be angry and talk a lot about it, but not actually do anything and not use any of his soft or hard power. But Trump was willing to place tariffs and use other soft power metrics on Colombia to force their hand. Now, of course, there were loads and loads of criticism saying that tariffs are just a tax on your own country, which of course isn't really true. Like with any increase in cost of a good or a service, that cost is split between the buyer and the seller, and it isn't always going to be equal. Different products will behave differently. But Colombia isn't exporting things that the United States really desperately needs and can't get elsewhere. The US imports about $6 billion of oil a year, but the US doesn't actually need to import any oil. That oil that it does import really isn't so much that it can't be replaced by any other global exporter either. They import about $2 billion worth of coffee from Colombia every single year. Again, coffee prices rising by a couple of percent really aren't going to destroy the American economy anyway. And Colombia would suffer a hell of a lot more from those tariffs than the US would, which is exactly why Trump instituted them. But what I really want to get across here is that the biggest issue here isn't for Trump or Colombia, it's for the globalists who are in power in most of the Western countries around the world, right? Take a look at the Labour Party and the Tory Party in the UK. The Tories aren't in power anymore, but they had been for 14 years prior to the Labour, and they are both essentially globalists. They are two sides of the same coin. We see the exact same thing in other European countries, and with Trudeau up in Canada and a bunch of other governing authorities. The leftist, globalist ruling class has essentially claimed that mass immigration is essential and that it's basically impossible to deport people, even these heinous criminals. We've had this whole massive ordeal with the Tories in the UK for years, and now with Labour as well, where they basically pretended to try and deport people using this weird scheme in Rwanda that was specifically designed to fail because they didn't actually want to deport anyone. And more recently, there's been mass outrage as a load of Pakistani gang rapists were sent to prison in the UK, convicted of their crimes for years, and they even have their citizenship stripped off them, and yet they were let out of jail years ago and they still live here in the UK, walking around free, and they're just never going to be deported as long as these globalist Labour or Tories are in power. Now, the globalist argument has always been really simple. Pakistan won't take the mass rapist back. It's inhumane to deport him there, and we don't have a choice. We're trying to deport him, honest, please believe us, but it's just our hands are tied. Well, Trump has proven that all of that is just simply lies over the course of 24 hours. In this specific example, UK residents send about $4 billion per year to Pakistan in remittances. The UK government pays Pakistan about £300 million per year in foreign aid, and there are about 250,000 Pakistani visitors to the UK every single year. If the British government were to place a tax on all remittances to Pakistan and to ban visas for those Pakistani citizens looking to travel into the country and to cancel all of that £300 million of foreign aid sent to Pakistan, expel all of their diplomats, what does the UK really lose from these actions? Genuinely not a lot at all. Things like remittances, they purely cost the UK money. We import a hell of a lot more from Pakistan than we export to them, and we don't need to import anything from them. There's nothing that we can't get from other domestic markets around the world. So this problem could be solved overnight by a government which actually cared, but none of this has ever even been considered because these globalists genuinely don't care about Britain or the United States or Canada or any country. This is the exact same situation we've seen with the Biden administration over the last 4 years. They simply don't care about the well-being of their country. Thankfully, though, Trump's actions have proved how easily solvable these problems are. And personally, I'm hoping that this essentially wakes up a part of our population and reminds them that actually, yes, Labour, Tories, these centre-left and centre-right parties all over the world are not on your side. I personally really look forward to continue seeing these revelations pour out with Trump back in power. He is and always has been blunt and straightforward, and that's going to expose the truth to the world.